next session, which is all about business continuity in these times of uncertainty. And I will welcome Thalia Mingo to run this session with all of us. So Thalia, maybe I introduce you quickly and then you can introduce Noreen as well. So Thalia, she has been a gender champion and advocate using her authentic leadership to energize others through periods of change and transformation for many, many years. Her career spans for more than 20 years in the healthcare industry with various different leadership roles in patient care, in payer pricing and contracting, and many different things. So I'm very happy to have Thalia with us here today. And I let you go on, Thalia. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. And I want to say thank you as well for the opportunity on behalf of Bristol Myers Squibb and the Bristol Myers Squibb Network of Women for this opportunity to talk about a field that is fast growing, and it is very near and dear to my heart because my background is chemistry and biology, actually. That is my degree. And so I'm really happy to be a part of this discussion. Joining me for the next part of the program is Noreen Gleason. Noreen is the Vice President of Business Continuity Management and Corporate Event the Corporate Event Response Team Lead. She's been with Bristol Myers Squibb for 9 years, and she's currently responsible for leading business continuity management, as well as I mentioned, the Corporate Event Response Team's responsive prevention, response, and recovery of significant risk and enterprise crises. Noreen and her team are responsible for providing governance and strategy to ensure that BMS's worldwide enterprise has plans to identify, predict, manage, and recover from critical risks to Bristol Myers Squibb. Since January 2020, Noreen has had a team of approximately 40 business units, 40 business function subject matter experts in BMS's recovery and response to the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic. Which is what we're going to dive into. So Noreen, welcome, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Thalia, and I'd like to echo your sentiments too. I'm very humbled and grateful to be here, so thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. And first I just want to share just a little bit because we did not talk about Bristol Myers Squibb, and I think for those who joined us who are not from Bristol, just a quick note of what we do. Bristol Myers Squibb is a global biopharma company. We're focused on, our mission is to discover, develop, and deliver innovative medicines to patients with serious diseases. We have a very strong culture of inclusion and a strong commitment to patients that starts at the top of our organization. And we believe that in order to do this well, we have to have and encourage every voice at the table, and that those voices should be diverse in both gender and as well as other ethnicities and cultures. So Noreen, I'm going to start with a very basic question. As we were chatting about what this conversation would be like, it occurred to me that there's a foundational question that we should ask. And that one is, tell us, if you can, define what business continuity is.
Sure. Yeah, I know sometimes that's a little bit of a nebulous definition, right? Not everybody understands it. But I do think that since COVID occurred, and again, it was a tragedy that it still is, this pandemic, but what I think it did do is highlight a little bit more about crisis management and business continuity management. So business continuity management is really what it says, right? You want to be able to build resistance to and have the ability to respond and recover from major risks and threats to the enterprise. So when you look at the pandemic, that was a major risk to any company. Some companies were able to respond and recover very quickly from it. Others weren't. You want to be able to safeguard, stakeholder interests and the company reputation, the brand, and value creating activities. So for us, Thalia, based on what you just said about our mission at Bristol Myers Squibb, we really have one very important mission, and it is to be able to deliver life-sustaining medicines to our patients. So if you take a hit because of a crisis in any one of our business functions, it throws off the entire equilibrium of the enterprise, which may prevent people from getting those life-sustaining medicines, which would be devastating for us in so many ways, but most of all, it would be incredibly devastating for our patients. So that's why, BMS has really adopted this pretty profound, um, they've dedicated resources to this organization that was stood up probably a couple years ago and just continues to grow.
So, so let's continue on that theme a little bit, as you've just given us that wonderful definition. So, how do you and your teams plan for the unknown to ensure that there's no interruption in our business processes and that patients are able to continue to get the medicines they so desperately need?
So I'll go back to both my colleagues, Sydney Klein and Amy Lyons. And by the way, Amy, I want to give her credit. She was the one that recruited me to become part of her more diverse team in corporate security about 9 years ago. So I always like to give her props for that. And I think one of the things that you you can do as a company to prepare for a major crisis like a pandemic, or Amy talked about wildfires in California or terrorist events around the world. We're in this very uncomfortable geopolitical situation right now, right, around the world. I think the main thing that you can do is, just like we're talking about diversity and inclusion, you have to build a team of subject matter experts. I am not a subject matter expert in manufacturing. I am not a subject matter expert in your field, Talia, like research and development or biology. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know about business development. I don't know a lot of different things, and I've only been in this industry for 9 years. But what I do know, what I have learned from my past, is that um, awareness breeds appreciation. And so I have to bring in a team of subject matter experts that when a crisis does occur, they're able to tell me, hey, Noreen, this is what's going to happen to supply chain. This is what's going to happen to clinical trials in R&D. This is what's going to happen in HR to our people in this country. So there's a lot of different things that come to play. And I think really one of the most important aspects of all of this is the communication. If you can have all of these things working and running really well in the background, if you can't communicate to your constituency properly, it's all for naught.
Wow. Okay. No, thank you for that. So, in that vein, communication is, one of the pinnacle requirements in your role as you manage through trying to prevent interruptions. But how has COVID, because you just spoke of it, changed the way we think and plan for business continuity to prevent those interruptions in enterprise functions?
So I think COVID, I think COVID has really brought to light the necessity for proper planning, right? You can never have too much preparation. And there's two entities to this. There's business continuity management, which is always running, and it should never stay the same. It needs to be completely dynamic and constantly changing. Criticality needs to be developed. What are your requirements for criticality? Because if everything's critical, then nothing's critical. So for a
Right.
worldwide organization like like BMS, being able to look at what is each business function's critical processes and places. That's running in the background and is always changing. The other thing is you have to have a team. These are two separate teams now, right? And you have the corporate event response team, which is also known as the CERT, and that's the reactive team. And you want to make
Okay.
sure that you have this very specific team of subject matter experts that are able to really react to something like the pandemic. So I think what the pandemic did, what COVID did, is it really provided the leadership team, the CEO, and the enterprise with this idea like, we're all in this together. This is affecting
Right.
every single one of us. But you have to have some entity there that's able to provide trust. Because if you remember during COVID, there's a lot of political actions going on during that time, not only here in the United States, but elsewhere. If you look at the UK and around the world, and the media can really, really, either give you the right information or the wrong information or misinformation or disinformation. So I think for a company like BMS, what happened was that employees really looked to one entity that was based in science and technology that was able to give them the facts that they needed to make life altering decisions. So COVID really did do a lot of different things, right? Created placed a premium on business continuity and crisis management.
Right. You know what I've heard you say, and I think it's so critically important, is knowing as you create your diverse teams at certain points along the journey as you're managing through this, it's important to recognize which voices are most important at the points of the journey, right? There are those points when, as you said, the conversations around what's happening in a business perspective. But then there's also the points when, let's talk about the medicines that are being made available and how they impact and will impact and how will the company respond. So it's also important to know that within that team of experts, who's going to speak when. That's what I'm hearing you say. Am I getting that right? Okay. So, one of the things
Yeah,
that
so I mean, the two women that are my colleagues that just spoke before, if you think,
go ahead.
I would have been foolish not to include them on my team, right?
Okay.
They're such great leaders. They have so much expertise. So they joined this team, right? The corporate event response team, as did a lot of other people. But the one thing that we really did, which I think, from a team perspective that we're very proud of, is the pandemic affected everyone worldwide. So we have lots of markets out, right? We have markets all throughout the world. We brought them in so that, I think Amy mentioned that sometimes you can be very focused in on your own, like your own thoughts and your own geography. We wanted to make sure that we had all of that cultural and ethnic representation on our team, because how the pandemic was affecting folks in Italy or in China or in Australia was much different than what was going on here in the United States, and how those countries were able to respond to this pandemic because of government laws and restrictions was much different as well. So that's why we had this very diverse team. We definitely considered a lot of different opinions, but we had this very centralized, it was a very centralized team that responded to this organization. I mean, to this pandemic, sorry.
Yep. So we were tracking with your thoughts. Thank you. One of the things that we've heard a lot about is lack of supply chain resources across multiple industries, and the challenges that it's causing globally. What are some new ways of thinking that you're seeing, in your role around these supply chain issues?
So supply chain was definitely affected because of the pandemic. And then on top of it, right, we had we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and, people are concerned about other conflicts throughout the world. I think one of the things that you have to do is be very proactive as opposed to reactive. That's, there are lots of lessons learned from the pandemic. In reference to supply chain, there are a lot of things that we as an organization consider. And it's also now a regulatory consideration, like how much supply stock do you have? How much do you want to keep there? And again, these are business related decisions that also goes up to the leadership team, especially for BMS, in our manufacturing business function. These are really key considerations. And it also kind of goes over into finance. So you can see that all of these types of decisions, when it comes down to supply chain, you have to be prepared. And when you look at different CMOs, you want to build up that redundancy, but know this: if there's another event like a pandemic, every pharma company is going to those CMOs. So therefore the pressure, it just kind of builds, and you may not be able to get what you want. So to take matters into your own hands and build up that redundancy in your own company and make people aware of, like, hey, this is why we're doing this. That's a big commitment for a company. Not all companies can do that. I understand that. Smaller companies don't have the resources, both financially or the human capital, to be able to do things like that. But as a leader in the pharma industry, I'm very proud of our CEO, Giovanni Cafario, and his leadership team, where we were able to have these types of conversations, really get the backing from them to be able to go, we want to be prepared. We want to be proactive. And so that's, I think, one of the ways that we've been able to navigate some of those challenges.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'm going to just throw a question at you that came through in the chat. It's how do you adapt to change and how do you prioritize? How do you navigate the complexity that all of that brings? And then I'll jump back to my other question.
I think that adapting to what happened, you have to be very integrated and collaborative and also holistic. I think that those are really important words, right? You, you,
Mm-hmm.
you have to think very horizontally rather than vertically. And you kind of have to
Right.
break down those silos, because if you're in a silo, you're not going to be able to see how an event, a crisis, whether it's the pandemic or wildfires or a terrorist event, um, eh, is going to affect the entire enterprise. I think you have to be very flexible. You have to be
Right.
adaptable, and you have to be
Mm-hmm.
agile. And sometimes that agility really comes down to being able to have, um, you know, the the permission or that relationship with the CEO and the leadership team to say, we have to do this right now. Let us tell you why, but we need your backing, or we need you to make a decision about this. Here's our recommendation, but this is really a decision that you need to make. That allows you to move really, really quickly. So being effective and efficient, timely, agile, adaptability, and yes, trust, right? You want to
Uh-huh.
build up that trust. You
Yeah.
want your leadership team to be able to trust you, and that takes time, right? This was a whole new dynamic for them.
Okay.
It was a whole different program, and I'm not so sure that they really understood it. I mean, we had been through other crises before, and that's how we actually got to this program. When you look at Hurricane Maria, for example, right? We handled that very well, but we looked at lessons learned and where there were some gaps and strengths. We kind of combined it and made this whole new program. So again, adaptability and flexibility, trust, and just really putting together a real strong team is very important.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's dive into, and this will be my last question for you, teams a little bit, right? So we heard Amy and Sydney both talk about diversity. Sydney mentioned the diversity iceberg, which I'm a fan of as well. And of course, our executive sponsor for Be Now, Chris Berner, our commercialization officer, talks about, he fundamentally believes that women holistically increase the intelligence of a team. I'm not going to, say no to that. But we also talk about how important diversity is to achieving what we need to achieve. How do you think having a diverse team has helped you in this current situation, and where do you see that pushing you as you go forward now?
So I think the diversity of our team, it did. I'm trying to think, where should I start? I mentioned it before. We're a global company. We reached out to the markets. We
Yep.
had weekly touch point meetings with the site leads and the managers in the markets to tell us about how COVID was affecting not only their business function, but their work, their workers. We took that into
Mm-hmm.
consideration. We looked at what was happening here in the United States and Puerto Rico. We combined it all. And we didn't have like a one size fits all response. We were very
Mm-hmm.
conscientious that, a lot of people felt differently about the crisis, when it came to getting vaccinations. We wanted to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that people really understood why vaccinations were important. We eventually went to mandatory vaccinations, and we knew that that was not going to be something that not everyone agreed with. But we took in all of that information about where we stood as a company and what would make us safe. And again, it all goes back to the company's number one priority is to develop and provide life-sustaining medicines to patients. So what do we have to do to protect ourselves in getting there? And we took, a number of steps, and, it was a long journey. It was like 2.5 years of, you know, putting this diverse team together and really enabling them, making sure that when they came to these meetings, they had the ability to speak up. I think Amy said that too, right? So when you have the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to share your thoughts in a very professional manner, of course, and working within the constraints of, what we consider to be acceptable behaviors, being able to say those things um, really makes a huge difference. I think that that led to a lot of our successes in navigating COVID. Um, the diversity and inclusion of our team, I think, was very important. And I just want to, one thing that I think maybe was touched upon before was that Amy and I both came from a very, very different background. We were in the federal government. We were both retired FBI agents, and it's very true. Diversity and inclusion in that organization at the time we were there, and prior to that, I was a state trooper. I would show
Wow.
up and be the only woman in a
Oh my
sea of guys, and I remember what that felt like.
God.
And you know what? This company that we work for now is sort of like nirvana to me when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I just could never have imagined that this company would have that type of program. And you can really see the benefits of it,
Yeah.
um, and just kind of the achievements that we've realized over time. Um, like I said, Amy brought me here, which was, a wonderful thing for me. I am grateful for that opportunity. Um, I think one thing that we haven't really talked about all that much is mentors, having a
Uh-huh.
mentor. Amy was my sponsor in getting to BMS. I applied for the job and eventually got it. But then I also developed mentors in this organization, both men and women of, a lot of different cultures and ethnicities, and being able to take the chance to leave corporate security and go to finance where business continuity sits. That's a whole different diversity that I was exposed to. That's a whole different
Oh,
way of thinking, and it's a whole different way of speaking, and I'm just very grateful and humbled by having these opportunities and landing where I did. And I sound kind of like the company guy. I'm sorry for that, but it really is a wonderful place to work.
yeah.
So
I think your work speaks to the intentional inclusion that is coming from the top, that sits within our company. And I don't think we can stress that enough. This is not words on a page. It's not rhetoric. It is literally the culture that we live in. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
And
sure.
thank
I was
go
I
ahead.
was going to say that, one of the things that I will always remember from my FBI career is, and I'm sure everybody on this call, well, I think there's probably some young people too, but you can kind of remember where you were on 9/11.
Right.
And both Amy and I were in New York City during 9/11, so we were right there. And the aftermath of that event has changed my life forever in being able to see how important communication is and the
Yeah.
collaboration. I think that that time there were a lot of organizations that were very stovepiped and not wanting to be able, not sharing information, which didn't breed appreciation or awareness. Um, and the the ability to prepare for that type of major event never
Mm-hmm.
became more critical. Watching, I was in the New York office, the FBI New York office. We didn't even have a place to go when our building was, condemned. We had to go set up a whole new office someplace else. We weren't as prepared as what we should have been. So I think for us coming here to this organization, and I've only had one private sector job, but really taking those lessons learned that we saw where we were in the federal government, and then um, kind of parlaying it here has made us a better organization. And again, that's kind of like diversity and inclusion, right?
That.
You're moving
Mhm.
segments of different types of jobs and taking the best that you can bring to another organization and making it something really special.
I appreciate that. And we're so fortunate. Thank you. I want to say thank you to Noreen for this conversation and for sharing your day today. I think I'm certainly walking away with a little more education than, and I've worked with you in the past, but I understand a lot more now. So I'm going to hand it over to Kristen, back to Kristen, for our next steps and our next action.
Thank you, Talia, and thank you, Kristen,
Yeah.
for having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was really, really interesting. And I thank you so much for sharing, Noreen, so much. And and how also the
Mm-hmm.
progress, you're mentioning how it was in the beginning and how it is now and how it is in BMS. So this is hopeful messages, because sometimes, you read statistics and you wonder, has there been any progress? And in fact, it has. So even if, certain places it goes back, but and maybe this is also something for all of us to remember. We always need to stay vigilant. We need to keep up what we have now, and then we need to keep improving. So
Agree.
Correct.
that is so good.